Hey guys, it's Logan here with Hydra 572. In my never-ending quest to stay up to date on knife reviews, today I will be reviewing the Spyderco Endura 4. As you can see, this is not the normal coloration. Normally this is only available with the black handles and satin polished blade, I believe. This is a sprint run that Chad actually picked up during a trip down to the Spyderco outlet. I acquired it in a trade. So Chad has actually already reviewed this for our channel. If you haven't checked out that video yet, go ahead and check it out. The link will be in the description. I think a caucus of different opinions on a blade can really help you to understand it more three-dimensionally than just listening to one person's opinion can. And it's cool that we can have two opinions on one blade in videos on one channel. That's one of the things that I like about having other guys that like knives right around me. And I haven't watched Chad's review in a while. Intentionally, I typically don't watch reviews of a blade in the week or 2 weeks leading up to me reviewing it, so that I don't have my opinion colored, but I do remember that I was sitting in the room listening to Chad filming that video, and him saying that you could use the blade as a tactical blade was the first that I had ever really thought of this specific blade as a fighting knife. Moving into intended usage, I would have thought of something this size more as an EDC blade for guys that only wanted to carry one knife. This could be the only knife that you would carry. It is a very capable EDC knife, being a brother of the very well-loved, very well-respected Endura 4. Or as the utility knife for guys that carry more than one blade if they wanted a large utility knife. If they like the wave opener, this blade starts to make sense as a complement to a larger fighting blade. I hadn't really thought of it as a tactical knife, and I still really don't. I think of a tactical knife as a knife that you would carry knowing that you were going into a dangerous situation. What I think this is an emergency defensive knife. That is, a knife that you would carry for EDC, that if you needed to defend yourself in a surprise emergency type situation, that you could use to defend yourself. So emergency defensive blade, I think, makes a little bit more sense as an intended usage, what with the wave opener and all. For a tactical blade, I will still maintain that you want a fixed blade or at least a very large, very sturdy folder. Moving on to pricing, $77 effectively on Blade HQ or $68 effectively on eBay. Those are for the black and satin polished colorations, the standard one. The blade profile, as you can see, is sort of a modified Endura 4 blade profile. Actually, a relatively large amount of stock was taken off of this top portion to incorporate the patented Emerson opener, leaving us with a pretty atypical design for a Spyderco knife, a relatively thin blade without a whole lot of belly. I'll hit tip first. It's actually a fairly broad tip, not very acute at all, though acute enough probably to do any fine cutting that you needed to do. Very strong. I would prefer a little bit narrower of a tip, though. This one is very broad. Belly, like I said, not a whole lot at all. It seems like we've got an upswept portion there, but that's actually a deceptively small little upsweep. The main portion of the blade is very linear, and so you're not going to dull the blade as evenly as you would a blade that has a whole lot of upsweep and belly. You will see a lot of your dulling focused on this small upswept portion near the tip. That's sort of a bummer. It sort of takes away from this knife's utility as an EDC blade. The steel is VG10, which retention I will say decent plus, certainly better than Spyderco's 8CR13, though it doesn't really compete in my mind with 154CM or S30V. Which is fine, however, because it is a much easier steel to sharpen. It is easily sharpenable like a more budget steel, like an AUS8 and 8CR13. So Spyderco tends to roll that way quite a bit, giving us a little bit softer steel that doesn't retain quite as long as some other brands' iterations of the same steel. However, very easy to sharpen, hone back to a shaving edge, and that goes for this knife as well. The grind, well, here's where it sort of starts to fall apart for me. As you can see, we've got a flat ground portion, we have a partial flat, as opposed to the Endura 4, which is full flat, and I think full flat would have been better with this blade. Now, typically I like a little flat portion to clamp into a consistent angle sharpener, any type of system, Lansky, Wicked Edge, or an Edge Pro Apex that uses a clamp type system or that just needs a flat to sharpen the blade at a consistent angle. That flat helps a whole lot. But for this blade, I would have preferred full flat, simply because the flat ground portion that they gave us here is really just too broad. It's much too steep of an angle for me. I think it takes away a lot of its utility. Compounding the problem of not having the belly, I think it just makes it a relatively poor EDC blade profile. And that goes for the bevel grind as well. That's actually a relatively broad grind. It could stand to be made more gradual. I might reprofile it at a later date. Moving on to deployment, well, as you can see, a lot of this knife is built around the wave opener, which is very cool. That's something that I've asked for from companies for a long time, whether they paid for the Emerson patent or not. I've liked Cold Steel's thumb discs that double as wave openers as well. Spyderco did pay for the patent on this model, and made a lot of their decisions, it seems, about this blade, the profile at least, around that Emerson opener. If you don't know what a wave opener is, basically as you're drawing this knife from your pocket in tip-up orientation, this will catch on the lip of your pocket and open the blade. It's the coolest and quickest way to open a knife. Also, we have the spider hole, which can be used as a thumb stud, and for your Spidey flicks, and even Spidey drops, which I will attempt to do an off-axis version of here. There we go. Now, this blade can do rotational or inertial type openings. However, like some of Spyderco's other FRN handled backlock knives, I'm thinking of the Centofonte when I say that, if you do a hard rotational opening, if you really flick it down, which like that, if you do it a little bit harder than what I just did there, the knife actually can hit and rebound, that is, hit in the open position and then rebound, without the lock ever engaging, which is sort of a bummer. It seems like a quality issue. But I suppose with the wave opener you won't be deploying this knife much that way anyway. Moving on to lock, we have a back lock with the David Bowie dent, supposedly so that the knife will not close in your hand from pressure. I guess that's what they say that indentation is for. I've never really worried about a back lock closing in my hand just due to the pressure of my grip. But it doesn't hurt anything, so I guess I'm glad to have it. Play, well, for a knife that costs this much, it's really too much play. We have side to side and up and down. Sort of a problem plaguing a lot of Spyderco's FRN handled blades. I won't say that it's a safety concern because I don't feel like it's going to close up on your hand, but it is certainly a quality concern. I don't want to be paying this much for a blade and having play in both directions that's concerning as this is. The handle is FRN with Spyderco's bidirectional texturing, which I do like. It breaks up the monotony of just having black checkered G10 all the time, and it does work pretty well. The liners, which you probably cannot see because that is a relatively slim handle, are skeletonized steel, and there is quite a bit of steel removed there, keeping the knife very light at 3.67 ounces. A sub 4 ounce folder is pretty light in this size range. The ergonomics, and I do feel minorly sacrilegious saying this, but I don't really like the ergonomics of the Endura 4 or of this version of the Endura 4, mainly because this choil here doesn't really work for me. I don't like having two fingers in the choil because I feel like I'm a little bit too far forward on the blade, though that is my preferred grip because it allows you to put a lot of pressure into that jimping and really get it to bite. And I don't really like it with only one finger in that choil, though it feels a bit more natural. I can't really engage on the jimping without making the grip pretty uncomfortable. So that's sort of a bummer. But I'm sure a lot of people love these ergonomics, so if you have a hand that's a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than mine, I'm sure that one of those two grips will be comfortable for you. Just neither of them really seems perfect for me. They're not bad, they're just not really great. The jimping, a little bit tackier would have been nice. Just a little bit sharper, a little bit extra grip. I like the shape of the ramp. Like I said, you can put a whole lot of pressure on that ramp comfortably with two fingers engaged in that choil. And that is a pretty comfortable grip, actually. But the jimping does not bite enough, and you've got to push a little bit harder than I would like to. The clip is a classic Spyderco hourglass clip, 4-way reversible, and with tip up, you have enough real estate. It is low riding so that nobody will notice, but you have enough real estate to grab on and engage your wave opener. So a pass on the clip, 4-way reversible. Moving on to presentation, I think it looks great on this side. I really love the coloration that they did for this Bayou Shooter sprint run. The other side, I'm not a member of Bayou Shooter, so their logo doesn't really mean anything to me, and it sort of sucks that we have to have the Emerson patent right there on the blade, especially when Spyderco's paying money to use it. But, you know, whatever, it is what it is. Presentation overall pretty good. Like I said, I like the display side, if you will. The quality actually sort of got some complaints here. Like I said, the play is really concerning. The issue with the lock not engaging when you flip it open is pretty concerning as well. And then, as Chad, I believe, talked about, we actually have a pretty egregious centering issue. The blade rubs once you're putting it in the handle. And I never talk about centering because as long as the blade doesn't rub, I could really care less if it looks nice closed in my pocket. But once the blade starts rubbing on the outside, I don't know if you guys can tell through the camera, but you can tell in person when you're tilting it around in the sun that it actually has started to rub some of the coating off. I've experimented with loosening and tightening that pivot, and it hasn't fixed the issue, it just rubs. And I'm afraid to take the knife apart because I hear if you take the Endura handles apart, the FRN cracks. I don't know if that's founded or not, but that is, I have heard over the YouTubes. So, quality, sorta concerning, actually. Value, VG10 and FRN for $70. I mean, we can get that for $50 from Spyderco. But, okay, the Emerson patent was probably pretty expensive, and Emerson openers on blades is something that I've been asking for. So ultimately, if all of my complaints about this blade have to do with them incorporating a feature that I've asked for, I guess I can't be too mad, you know? The issues with the grind, the issues with the blade profile, if all that has to do with them giving me something that I've been asking for, even if it was done, as I feel, a little bit clumsily, okay, I can't be too mad at them. So value, fine. Competition, as seems to be the case more and more with the Spydercos that I'm reviewing, a lot of this blade's competition comes from other Spyderco blades, namely the normal Endura. When Reed got his normal Endura in, I really liked the thing. I think it makes a better EDC blade than this one does because it doesn't have the problems that I talked about with the blade profile and the grind. And you could do the zip tie modification and get that thing to wave open just as fast. Same thing goes for the Bird Cara 2 G10. I've heard from multiple reputable sources, as being Cineric77 and Nothing Fancy himself, that that blade forms an interesting comparison with the Spyderco Endura that actually paints it pretty well, and you could do the zip tie modification the same there. So if you're a bit more budget-minded, the Bird Cara 2 seems to be made to take care of you. The Griptilians from Benchmade, I am weary of the axis lock, but a lot of people love it, so there's another more EDC-minded blade. The Ripples from CRKT, the same thing, the more expensive ones that are in the $70, $80 price range. And Cold Steel has a number of blades in this price range. If you are looking for a more tactical fighting application, I think those blades would serve you very well. Overall, as I said, if most of my problems with the blade have to do with Spyderco listening to consumers and incorporating a feature that I've been asking for, I can't get too mad at him, and Chad did end up buying the blade, and I'm glad he did. I do like the thing. It just seems to have a couple of hiccups. I wish they had continued the flat grind, maybe giving us a little flat portion up toward the top to clamp into our systems. And I wish that the edge itself was a little bit better profiled coming from the factory, but I have the ability to change that pretty easily, as will most guys who are that concerned about their edge. And it did come very sharp, and I was easily to hone it pretty easily without changing it too much. So I guess I can't complain. It is certainly sharp enough to do most EDC tasks. So overall, I will give the blade a pass, though I don't like it as much as I think I would like a normal Endura with a simple zip tie modification. Go into specs real quick. Overall length, 8.81 inches. Actually a pretty long knife, but you don't get to see that much because, as I said, a lot of your time you'll spend pretty forward on the blade with some hanging out the back. Handle length 5 inches, a relatively large handle because of that choil. Blade length 3.81 inches, actually a pretty large blade, though I'm not sure if you were using this in a tactical application, I'm not sure you'd get to utilize all of that if you were stabbing. I think the blade would probably stop its penetration right around there, though that's certainly still enough to defend yourself with. And I would prefer to slash just because there's less commitment involved anyway. But regardless, this is an emergency defensive blade, so we don't need to talk about that strategy of defense all that much. Blade thickness is 1/8 of an inch, a relatively thick stock, not really helping the problem of having too abrupt of grinds, too steep of grinds. A little bit thinner of a stock actually would have served them well, which is not something that I ask for often. And the weight is 3.67 ounces, so overall a very light blade. So I always feel bad when I give a negative review because I have to harp on quality issues that I see, but overall I do like this blade, and I do recommend it hesitantly. It's hard for me not to recommend that you just get an Endura 4 and do the zip tie modification, but I'm afraid that if we do that, Spyderco might think that people don't want the wave openings, and oh well, it's not our job to use our dollars to communicate with companies when their designs incorporating features we want have hiccups. Regardless, that's what I did all the same. And I do like the blade, and if you do want a pure Emerson opener, if you're an Emerson fan, or if you're just an Endura fan and you'd like to try out a different style of Endura, very interesting option, and the Endura 4 will certainly be getting a review here relatively soon, which I can only assume will be very favorable, as it does not have some of the issues talked about here. Overall, a pretty cool little blade, though. Happy to have it in the collection. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more of the same.